Hello, everyone, and welcome to G5's webinar on website accessibility. I'm Christina Shaw from G5's product marketing team, and I'm joined today by Thomas LaValle, our Senior Director of Compliance. So let's jump right in. What is website accessibility? Website accessibility refers to development and design best practices needed so that all users, regardless of their ability, can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the website. So how do you know if your site is accessible?
Well, Christina, one of the best ways to determine whether your site is accessible or not is to check it against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. And we'll talk about what these are a little bit later, but just want to note at the outset that WCAG guidelines are not any requirement for any business in the United States to follow. It's a private entity, created these several years ago, but they've gained such wide adoption across the world that they become the de facto standard to use when we're talking about website accessibility. So before we go into detail for what the WCAG is and how you can conform to the guidelines, I want to just take a pause to mention what they're not. They are not a law, they're not a regulation. Using these guidelines doesn't prevent you from being sued by somebody alleging that your site is not accessible. And we are aware there have been a couple firms over the past 2 years have been sending out thousands of letters to private companies alleging that their sites are not accessible, and unless they pay that firm a settlement, they're going to file a suit in state or federal court. WCAG is not something that's going to prevent that from happening, but what it is going to do, if you conform to these guidelines, is provide a strong defense if you were to receive one of those letters. It's not going to prevent it from happening, but it's definitely something that you want to do to put you on sure footing so that if you see one, you're able to respond. So getting into the details for what WCAG is and how you can conform to it, we're going to talk about the 4 main principles. And these are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And instead of going through the technical details of each of these pillars, I'm going to give an example because I think that would be a little easier to understand and to absorb given the amount of time that we have today. So let's start off with perceivable. And that's in essence making sure that people with all ability can understand the information you're trying to present to them. So think about pictures, think about videos. If you have somebody who cannot see, those are not going to be helpful to them. I mean, videos may have voice, but if there's imagery in the videos, they're not going to understand what's happening in those. So text alternatives, captions, things like those are extremely helpful and are one of the main pillars to WCAG. Moving over to operable, we want to think about how somebody is going to use your website. Whether that's using a mobile device or using a desktop or a laptop computer, folks with different abilities may not be able to swipe or use a mouse. So we want to design the sites so that they can be used either through keyboard shortcuts, through a screen reader software, or even some folks have optical devices so they can browse your websites just by using their eyes and where they're looking at the screen. And so that's something that you want to work on foundationally to your site to ensure that's operable for people with all abilities. Moving on next to understandable, we want to make sure that the content that you're putting on your site is just that, is understandable. So avoid emojis, avoid hashtags, anything that has computer code in it. We want it to be just plain language and flowing so that whoever is entering your site can get the information that they need or that you want to present in an easy manner. And then finally, we have robust. So this comes into play because there's not just one company that makes accessibility software. So there are different screen readers, different media players, things like that. And they require different types of tagging and different types of code. So you want to make sure that your website provider is developing your site in a manner so that it plays well with all these different technologies. So for instance, if you have somebody that's coming into your site using a screen reader, they don't get the audio from a video that just starts looping indefinitely, and then they can't get to any other parts of your site because somebody didn't put a proper end tag on it. So moving on to the different levels of WCAG, this piece gets a little bit confusing because WCAG has 3 levels, all of which are considered to conform to these guidelines. However, it's your choice which one you want to use. We recommend at the very least following level A, and this level A focuses on your website characteristics that are mostly under the hood. So you're unlikely to notice an aesthetic difference between a site that is or is not level A compliant. What you will notice is though that if you're using a screen reader or you're using other assistive technology, that you're able to navigate the site just as easily or similarly easily as someone who doesn't need to rely on those types of software. And the reason why this is so highly recommended is because it opens up your audience, it makes you more accessible to more people, and has little effect on the actual visualizations of your site. Moving on to level AA though, this is a higher standard. It is not necessarily what every company wants because there are some design restrictions when you move to level AA. These include contrast restrictions, font restrictions, sizing, things like that. So, you know, you need to think, is my logo, are my corporate colors, or things like that going to be available under level AA, or do I need to change them? So if you want to take it to a higher level and make your site even more accessible, we recommend that, but definitely talk with your website provider to understand the details for these requirements and whether it's something that you can easily achieve or not. Or if that's going to materially change the, the scope of the audience that you're able to reach by doing so. And then finally, there's level AAA. This is the highest level, and we honestly don't see it used very often. It's extremely restrictive, reduces what you're going to see on a website to essentially just text, large, high contrast text, and that's it. So obviously many businesses don't strive to achieve level AAA, and the consortium that created the WCAG guidelines, they don't even recommend it for most companies themselves. So while it does exist, you can take a look at it. It's not necessarily something that you may want to shoot for. So really think about level A and level AA, AAA, you know, you can save that for a later day or maybe not at all.
Thank you so much, Thomas. So based on all this fantastic information, I'm sure you are wondering as a marketer how you can stay ahead. This is not something you do once and forget about it. It's an ongoing effort. If you're worried that your site is not accessible today, here are a few quick wins based on the 4 principles that could be implemented fairly quickly. With Perceivable, ensure that text alternatives are available for any non-text content. Operable. You want to ensure that your content does not flash. This could cause seizures or physical reactions. Understandable. Make sure there are labels or instructions provided when content requires user input. And robust. Elements should have a start and end tag and shouldn't contain duplicate attributes. Don't stop after those quick wins. Get planning and ensure your site maintains accessibility by asking the following questions to your website provider. Does my site conform to WCAG standards? If so, at what level? What could make my site fall out of conformance? And can you provide a report on how I could improve?
And Christina, while those are all good things to do and to keep in mind, I really want to emphasize as well that ongoing review for accessibility is absolutely critical. It's not a one-time fix. It's something that can be thrown out of whack if someone in your company changes a picture, changes text. If you have an integration with a payment system, with a property management system, and they make changes to something that's integrated into your website, that could also throw it out of conformance with these guidelines. And then also, these guidelines are updated from time to time. It's not frequent, but it does happen. So you want to ensure on a regular basis that you or your website provider are going in and checking in on accessibility to ensure that you haven't deviated from the course. So that said, I wanted to thank you all for your time today. If you have any further questions, you can reach out to Christina or me, or if you are interested in a checklist that we've created for accessibility, you can see that at the link below.